When his smartwatch vibrated on the table, I couldn't resist looking. It was just a notification, but the name of the place made my heart race. Motel, 10 p.m. The screen flashed before my eyes like a sentence. I felt my hands tremble, as if the world had stopped there. The excuse of extra training at the gym no longer made sense. In that instant, I realized it wasn't paranoia nor exaggeration. It was proof. Cold, digital, impossible to deny. I mentally relived all the times he'd called me suspicious, jealous. With every word now, it felt like he was mocking me. The intuition I'd tried so many times to silence screamed louder than ever. I swallowed the pain like someone swallowing poison. But I didn't let anything show, not even a single gesture. On the outside, silence. On the inside, anger and despair. It was as if a horror movie had begun and I was the protagonist, unaware of the ending. I only knew one thing. That notification would be just the first piece of a devastating puzzle. In the days that followed, I began to see my own home differently. Every corner of the house seemed to carry a shadow, as if the betrayal had already entered before me. The scent of his perfume, mixed with another scent I didn't recognize, clung to the air. Even the walls seemed to know before I did. The silence between us was already more revealing than any words. I remember a family dinner when he answered a call and went out into the backyard. His low, hurried voice seemed to conceal urgency. I turned my gaze to the table and saw my sister watching me, sensing something was wrong. I smiled tightly, but inside I wanted to snatch the phone from his hand. The secret was there, disguised as normality. The gym routine also changed color. I no longer saw training. I saw excuses. Schedules that didn't match, sweats that weren't from the treadmill. He'd leave with a bottle of water in his hand and return smelling of cigarettes and sweet perfume. The details screamed. I tried not to go crazy, but each clue was a knife cutting deeper. One Saturday afternoon, I noticed he became irritated when I offered to accompany him. He created obstacles, made excuses, said I needed rest. He seemed to want to shield that space, as if it were forbidden territory. That's when I realized he wasn't just lying, he was building a parallel life. And I, without realizing it, was outside it. I began to notice small signs that had previously escaped me. The way he locked himself in the bathroom with his cell phone. The restrained smile when receiving messages. The more carefully chosen clothes, even for going out just for a run. How had I not noticed before? It was as if he were teaching me to see a truth I'd always refused to see. One night, he left his watch charging in the living room. I picked it up with trembling hands. There were records of steps, heartbeats, locations, each piece of data, an invisible scar. I saw that at the times he said he was training, the numbers didn't match. A body burning energy elsewhere, in another bed. My chest burned. The confirmation wasn't yet complete, but the suspicion was poison enough. I put the watch back on the charger, like someone returning a diffused bomb. I smiled when he entered the room, as if nothing had happened. But inside, I wasn't the same. The game had changed, and now I played in silence. One Sunday morning, he came back from the street with coffee and bread, as always. He kissed my forehead as always. But there was something in his gaze that wasn't his anymore. He was distant, disconnected. It was as if he kissed out of obligation, not love. I smiled. But inside, something died completely. Every ordinary detail became a sign. The damp towel in the bathroom, the perfume in the car, the message archived on my phone. I no longer saw routine. I saw clues. And the more I saw, the deeper I sank into anguish. I felt like I lived in a house with ghosts. The ghost of the woman he claimed to love, and the shadow of the other, whom I didn't know. One night, I couldn't help myself and asked again, "Are you sure he's just a gym buddy?" He didn't blink. He looked me in the eye and repeated like someone who's practiced lying, "You have to trust me." Anger surged through me, but I swallowed it. I no longer wanted answers. I wanted proof. That's when I began my silent investigation. I was a wife, but I became a detective. Every Uber ride recorded, every step tracked, every detail hidden. I took mental notes, discreetly saved screenshots, creating an invisible map of his routine. And the more I pieced it together, the more the pieces fit together. The picture began to become clear. The cruelest moment was when I saw he spent hours in a distant neighborhood. On the map, it was always the same spot. My heart raced. It wasn't the gym, it wasn't work. It was another life. I stared at that address like someone staring into an abyss. Everything I feared most was there, in numbers and coordinates. One of the nights he said he'd be training, I decided to follow him by car. I stayed a few streets behind, sweaty hands on the steering wheel. He turned onto a side road and stopped in front of an inconspicuous building. I saw the door open and a woman appeared, smiling. My heart imploded, but I didn't honk, I didn't get out, I didn't scream. I just watched, helpless. I drove home in silence like someone carrying a corpse. The corpse of trust, of innocence, of faith. He arrived later, brought chocolates, feigned normalcy, and I smiled, as if nothing had happened. The hardest part was lying next to him that night, feeling the calm breathing of someone sleeping peacefully. The deleted messages, the exchanged passwords, the rehearsed excuses, everything was already clear. But I knew I needed definitive, unquestionable proof, something that could destroy the lie without a chance of defense, and fate seemed to conspire to hand me that proof. With every move he made, the truth drew closer. At work, colleagues began to whisper. Subtle comments, sidelong glances. I pretended not to understand, but every word was an invisible knife. He's acting different, isn't he? Always busy. I smiled, changed the subject. But deep down, I knew they already knew. I was the last one to accept the obvious. At the gym, I noticed uncomfortable glances. People looked away, whispered, glanced at each other, as if carrying a secret they didn't dare reveal. It was humiliating. I felt like the naive wife, the one who couldn't see. But within me, a strength was born. I wouldn't be a victim. I would be the witness who would make the truth scream. I began to prepare myself emotionally, like someone preparing for battle. Every smile of his was more ammunition for me. Every lie was another stone to throw back. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I knew. The day of confrontation would come. And I would have no pity. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about dignity. About how often women are silenced, manipulated, called crazy. I no longer sought just proof. I sought justice. And when that flame ignited, I realized there was no turning back. Because deep down, I knew his downfall was inevitable. All it took was one more piece of work, one more detail, one more mistake from him, and the end of that lie would be as devastating as an earthquake. But I still hadn't imagined what I'd find in the next notification that would change everything. That morning, I woke with a strange tightness in my chest. The sun was streaming through the window, but it seemed cold, distant. He still slept beside me, peaceful, as if nothing existed beyond that moment. I watched his face and wondered, how can someone live in two versions of themselves? His silence was louder than any scream. I got up slowly, as if not wanting to wake the enemy. I made coffee, set the table, everything as usual. But deep down, I was no longer the same woman who did this for love. Now, my every gesture was charged with vigilance. It was as if I were an actress in a play where only he still believed the charade. I began to notice details that had previously escaped me. The grooming of his beard, the shirt he chose for training, the look in the mirror, too long, like someone preparing to be seen. It wasn't about health anymore, it was about seduction. His body wasn't being molded for me, but for someone out there. One afternoon, I borrowed his car. The scent invaded me instantly. A sweet, persistent perfume that had nothing to do with me. On the seat, a strand of blonde hair rested like forgotten evidence. I held that strand between my fingers and felt a shiver. It was almost like holding a note that said, "He's not just yours." At the office, I tried to distract myself, but I couldn't. I opened spreadsheets, answered emails, but my mind always returned to that strand of hair. How many times had he come home smiling, hugging me, knowing his body bore traces of another woman? The humiliation burned more than the pain. I was being deceived in silence. That night, he arrived tired, saying he'd run 10 kilometers. I smiled. But when I looked at my smartwatch, I realized the contradiction. My heart rate spiked at inconsistent times. It wasn't running effort, it was another kind of effort. and I once again swallowed the truth like poison. I began writing everything down in a hidden notebook. Schedules, routes, excuses. It was like writing a war diary. With each page, his lie became clearer, more grotesque. I was no longer just his wife, I was an eyewitness to his betrayal. And that notebook became my silent weapon. At a dinner with friends, he made a point of embracing me in public. He kissed me on the cheek, laughed loudly as if he were the perfect husband. I smiled too, acting perfectly. But inside, anger grew. He wanted to scream to everyone there, "Don't be fooled, he's not that man." But I held back, because I knew the impact would be stronger if I waited. On my phone, I found digital receipts for mysterious deliveries. Wine, chocolates, even flowers. None of them reached me. Each item was an arrow piercing my chest. The cruelest thing was seeing him remember details to please another woman, while I no longer even received a birthday rose. One night, he hugged me and said, "You are the best thing in my life." I swallowed hard, letting the words fall over me like stones. He still had the courage to look me in the eyes and repeat promises while living a lie. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just betrayal, it was acting. The late nights became my allies. I waited for him to sleep and rummaged through drawers, pockets, notifications. I discovered archived messages, unnamed numbers, deleted photos that still left traces in the cloud. It was like digging through a graveyard of secrets. Each discovery hurt, but also strengthened me. One Sunday, he left his gym bag open in the living room. Inside, I found a small bottle of women's perfume. I smelled it, closed my eyes. It wasn't mine, never had been. That was more devastating than any screenshot. It was the materialization of the lie. I held on tight, like someone holding an enemy trophy. I confronted him with just my eyes that night. He sensed something in me had changed. He asked if I was okay. I replied with a cold smile, "Perfectly." His lie continued, but now there was fear in his eyes. He sensed my patience was running out. With each passing day, I felt like the whole city knew. The streets, the neighbors, even strangers seemed to look at me as if to say, "Poor thing, she doesn't know." This feeling gnawed at me, but it also gave me strength. Because I knew that when everything came to light, I wouldn't be the one embarrassed. It would be him. Once, during a party, I saw his phone vibrate. The screen flashed briefly, but I managed to read the beginning of the message. "It was wonderful yesterday." My heart froze, but I held back my reaction. He looked at me, searching for signs. I smiled again. Inside, my world was crumbling. I began secretly recording audio. Conversations, apologies, suspicious phone calls. Each file was a brick in the wall I was building against him. I no longer needed private lessons. I needed solid evidence. And this secret file became my greatest strength. The most painful thing was realizing that even our son was already suspicious. One day, he asked why his father was never home. I choked back tears, made excuses, but deep inside I felt the greatest pain. The betrayal wasn't just against me, it was against our family. And that made me swear I wouldn't let it slide. He began to feel too secure. He would stay away for hours, arriving laughing, inventing poorly told stories. Little did he know that his every move was being recorded, every lie was being guarded. And the more he lied, the more relentless I became. I was no longer the same woman. I was someone ready to bring down an empire. I went to bed that night knowing something big was about to happen. I didn't know when, but I felt fate was already preparing the next blow. The lie wouldn't last long. And when it collapsed, it would drag everything down with it. But I still had no idea of the devastating weight of the race that was about to fall upon me. That week, I decided to observe more than speak. Silence became my greatest weapon. He thought I was still blind, that his excuses still worked. But with each gesture, I saw more. It was like watching a movie in slow motion, where the villain reveals himself bit by bit. I noticed his messages always arrived at unlikely times. Late at night, during meetings, even at family dinners, his phone would vibrate, and he, as if reflexively, would smile. It was a different, intimate smile, one that was no longer meant for me. Seeing that gesture hurt more than any spoken word. One night, I pretended to sleep. I watched as he got out of bed, grabbed his phone, and went to the living room. The light from the device illuminated his face, full of desire and excitement. I watched hidden, with half-closed eyes. That scene was etched like a silent stab wound, which still bleeds in my memory. I began frequenting the same places he claimed to be: gym, cafes, even the street where the company was located. At every turn, his absence was glaring. I discovered the routine he'd sold me was a well-rehearsed farce, and the feeling of living next to a stranger only intensified. Once, I made up a story about wanting to work out at the same time as him. The reaction was immediate: nervousness, a change of plans, a disguised irritation. He didn't want me there. And this refusal was the clearest proof there was something to hide. Because when someone loves, they're not afraid to share their space. The cruelest thing was how he still tried to maintain the image of the ideal husband. Flowers for no reason, affectionate messages, public praise. It was all an act. But his eyes no longer shone for me. I no longer saw love. I saw guilt. And guilt is a mask that always slips. I decided to test how far the lie went. I called at random times just to see his reaction. He answered quickly, but his rapid breathing and the background noises always gave it away. Once, I heard muffled female laughter. He denied it, made excuses, and I, once again, mentally recorded the scene. The smartwatch became my silent accomplice. Steps, routes, calories. Each piece of data was a map of betrayal. I saw that he'd recorded runs in places I'd never been. Incompatible schedules, improbable distances. The technology he used to control his body ended up being the key to exposing his soul. One day, he forgot to delete the route. I saw the address clearly: a cheap hotel, far from the gym. My heart froze, but I didn't cry. I photographed it, saved it, kept it. It was the proof I needed. He didn't know it, but the watch had just revealed the truth. At dinner that night, I looked at him and smiled. He smiled back, confident. He had no idea his charade was crumbling. He swallowed his food calmly, while I digested the poison of the truth. The difference was that I was already preparing to spit it back out at the right moment. I began to plan every step. It was like setting a trap. I didn't just want to find out. I wanted to make him feel the weight of his own lie. And the more I thought, the more strength I found. Because it wasn't just about betrayal anymore, but about regaining the dignity he'd tried to steal from me. At work, I started hearing comments that weren't meant for me. Loose words, discreet giggles. "He's living too well lately." I pretended not to understand, but my blood boiled inside. The worst part of the betrayal wasn't the act itself, but the ridiculousness of being the last to know. At social gatherings, my friends would look away, as if they knew more than I did. It was humiliating. But I held myself upright, because inside me, a plan was underway. They laughed now, but soon they would witness his downfall. Even our children noticed the change. They asked why their father was away so much. I made excuses, hid tears. It was the cruelest part. Protecting my children from a truth I myself was still processing. And it was at that moment that I realized he hadn't just destroyed me, but the home we'd built together. One afternoon, I decided to follow him. The car was in front, me right behind, keeping my distance. I watched him park in front of a discreet house. I waited a few minutes, and then she appeared, smiling, getting into his car. The scene was so clear it felt like a slap in the face. I didn't need words. The gestures spoke volumes. I drove home in silence, their image etched in my mind. He arrived hours later, making up banal excuses. He hugged me, kissed me, as if nothing had happened. And I returned it, hiding my hatred behind a smile. Because I knew, soon, I would be the one laughing. I spent sleepless nights devising possibilities, confronting him at home, exposing him in public, revealing the evidence all at once. 1,000 ideas raced through my mind. What held me back was the desire to choose the most precise moment, the one that would leave him breathless, with no way out. I no longer saw just an unfaithful husband. I saw a mediocre actor misinterpreting the role of an honest man. And like any bad actor, I knew he would soon forget his lines and stumble over his own script. I just had to wait. Because deep down, something bigger was about to happen. A revelation that would not only confirm my suspicions, but change everything irreversibly. And when that revelation arrived, there would be no more hiding the rot he tried to disguise behind smiles. That Tuesday morning, his phone vibrated on the table while he was taking a shower. The screen flashed briefly, but it was enough for me to see one detail, a red heart followed by a "see you later." I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't a work message nor a message from a friend. It was something intimate, forbidden, hidden. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. He had set a new password, but the preview of the notification burned through me like fire. I committed the image to memory, knowing that simple detail was enough to dismantle his excuses. Anyone who says they only have one gym buddy doesn't get hearts at midnight. I acted again as if nothing had happened. I made the bed, made coffee, and set the table. On the outside, I was the attentive wife. On the inside, she was a relentless researcher. Every gesture he made as he came down the stairs, every forced smile, was like a piece fitting into the puzzle of betrayal. At work, I couldn't concentrate. Screens blurred, reports blurred. My heart raced, remembering that message. I wondered how many times he'd met with her while I believed his excuses. It felt like I was living in two worlds, the one of his lies and the one of my stifled truth. That night, he arrived late. He walked through the door with wrinkled clothes and a practiced smile. "Training was tough," he said. I looked into his eyes, pretended to believe him, but inside me a voice screamed. I no longer saw an athlete returning from the gym. I saw a man trying to disguise the smell of another body. The different scent hit me with the first hug. Sweet, striking. It wasn't mine, it was hers. Anger nearly made me explode, but I swallowed it. He didn't understand a thing, because I'd learned to use the mask he so often wore. And that was my greatest weapon, making him believe he was still in control. I decided to approach the gym. I went alone, as if seeking health, but in reality I was looking for answers. I observed every face, every conversation, every gesture. Some women looked away when they saw me. Others whispered to each other. I felt the truth was there, circulating among the dumbbells and treadmills. An employee recognized me and commented, "Your husband works out a lot with a new student. They're always together." Her smile was innocent, but to me it was a stab in the face. I smiled back, thanked her, but inside I was on fire. The name Gym Buddy finally had a face, a smell, and a routine. I returned home in silence. He was already there, watching television, relaxed. Sitting on the couch, he looked like an ordinary man with nothing to hide. But I knew. The contrast between what I saw and what I knew was driving me crazy. It was like living in a house with fake painted walls. I grabbed the notebook I'd hidden in the back of the drawer and wrote, "Train with a new woman, always together. Message with a red heart." Every line in that diary became proof, not just against him, but against my own tendency to doubt myself. The paper reminded me that I wasn't crazy. I began to watch his eyes. When he spoke to me, they were dull. When he looked at his phone, they lit up. It was a reflex he couldn't control. And that's when I realized I didn't need to hear a confession. His body was already confessing for him, and nothing could erase that from my mind. One Friday, he said he had a longer workout. I smiled and wished him luck. As soon as he left, I got in my car and followed at a distance. He actually went to the gym, went inside, but left minutes later through the back. My heart raced. His path wasn't to any treadmill. It was to a place I should never have been. I followed him until I saw him stop in front of an inconspicuous building. A woman ran out, dressed in workout clothes, and got into the car. They kissed right there, shamelessly, unafraid. My chest exploded. It was living proof, plastered right in front of me. There was no more doubt, only the raw pain of confirmation. I drove home with my hands sweating on the steering wheel. The scene of them together replayed in my mind like a nightmare on a loop. The worst part wasn't the kiss. The worst was realizing he hadn't shown that sparkle in his eyes when he kissed me in the last few months. That detail destroyed me more than any physical betrayal. When he returned that night, I smiled. I asked how the workout went. He answered naturally as if he'd run 10 kilometers. I watched in silence, held my breath, and realized his lie no longer had any power over me. Because now, I had the truth locked deep in my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. The clock struck 3 in the morning, and I stared at the ceiling, reliving the scene. I wanted to wake the children, tell them everything, scream, expose them. But something inside me told me to wait. I knew patience would be my triumph. The right moment would come, and it would be devastating. I began to view each day as preparation for war. I saved messages, took discreet photos, wrote down addresses. What had once been pain now became ammunition. And the more he smiled, thinking he was deceiving me, the more I loaded my arsenal. His downfall wouldn't be simple. It would be devastating. I began to think about how to expose the truth. I imagined revealing it in front of friends, showing screenshots at the dinner table, even sending proof to her family. The thirst for justice grew. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the times he'd laughed at my intuition, calling it paranoia. Because every red heart, every half-assed apology, every drop of perfume that wasn't mine was now recorded. He believed he was clever, but technology, fate, and my patience had already put me ahead of the curve. And when the time came, there would be nowhere to hide. I didn't know it yet, but the next discovery would be so brutal that it would change not only my marriage, but my entire life. That night, I watched his every move like someone studying an enemy. The way he quickly took off his shoes, the rush to hide his phone, the longer-than-usual shower, everything revealed the same thing. He was carrying guilt. And guilt, no matter how hard he tries to hide it, always oozes out. I lay in bed feigning exhaustion, but I was alert. My phone vibrated more than once, illuminating the headboard. He hurriedly emerged from the shower, grabbed the device, and turned his back. His expression was like someone reading something forbidden. I smiled silently because I knew. His every gesture was more revealing than 1,000 words. At work, a colleague casually commented, "I saw your husband at the mall last night." I swallowed hard because that same night he'd said he was in a meeting. I asked if he was alone, and his answer was a razor. "No, I was with a girl. It seemed fun." The world spun, but I feigned normalcy. That night, I confronted him with an innocent question. "How was the meeting?" He answered with rehearsed details, even naming names. I looked at him steadily, nodded, but didn't argue. Because I understood. When a liar talks too much, it's because he's trying to cover up holes with words. And there he was digging his own grave. I decided to increase my vigilance. I discreetly installed an app that synced notifications from his smartwatch to my phone. It was like opening a window to the parallel life he was trying to hide. His runs, his steps, his heartbeats, everything reached me in real time. He was cruel, but also liberating. One night at 10 p.m., the notification arrived. Location at a motel in the city. My heart raced, but not with doubt. It was certainty. He had delivered the proof with his own hands. And in that instant, I felt the pain turn to coldness. The wound turned to ice. I waited for him to come home. He came in smiling, saying the gym had been tough. I took in every detail. His clothes still smelled fragrant, but not from sweat. The watch didn't lie. I silently knew I held in my hands the key to dismantling a lifelong charade. The other day, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at my cell phone screen. The map showed his route to the motel, minute by minute. It was no longer just a suspicion. It was a digital document, impossible to deny. I considered confronting him then and there, but chose to wait. Revenge takes time. I began to treat him with a calmness that even I found strange. I made coffee, smiled, asked trivial questions. He believed he was still fooling me. And the more confident he became, the closer he came to falling. It was like watching a trapeze artist without a net. Sooner or later, the fall would be fatal. At dinner with friends, he made a point of holding my hand, laughing loudly, kissing my cheek. I acted perfectly, as if I were the doting wife. But inside me, his every touch was poison. And I knew that soon everyone there would see the true face of the man they admired. One afternoon, while he dozed on the couch, I grabbed his phone. The password was new, but shortcuts don't lie. In his Uber history, I saw the same address repeated several times. His heart froze, but soon warmed with anger. He wasn't just lying, he was underestimating my intelligence. I decided to go to that address alone. I arrived in front of a simple building with peeling walls. I stayed in the car, watching. And then, I saw the same woman who had been waiting for him, hurrying inside. Shock made me close my eyes tightly. It was real. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't made up. It was flesh and blood. I drove home in silence, swallowing back my tears. He arrived later with a bouquet of flowers. He gave them to me as if they were love. But to me, They were flowers of mourning. Mourning for the trust he had murdered. I placed them in a vase, smiled, but felt nothing anymore. My heart was on standby. Nights became long. I no longer slept. I just planned. I thought about every detail of the confrontation. Where, how, when. It wouldn't just be an argument. It would be a spectacle. The truth would come out before everyone, and he would have nowhere to hide. I even wrote messages I never sent. Words of hate, of pain, of freedom. He kept them on his phone as if they were goodbye letters. Maybe I didn't need them, but they gave me strength. It was like screaming silently just for myself. In the midst of it all, I realized it wasn't just a marital issue. It was social. It was the same pattern. Men cheat. Women are called paranoid. He called me crazy, but he was the one living two lives. This awareness gave me even more courage. I wasn't fighting just for myself, but for everyone. I began to observe how he looked at his children. The smile was the same, but now I saw falseness. Because those who destroy a family in silence have no right to pretend love. This realization disgusted me, but also strengthened me. Justice needed to be served, and I would be her arm. I prepared my heart for the inevitable. I was no longer afraid of confrontation. I was thirsty. Because with every beat of my heart, I remembered the night his clock marked the motel. It was like an invisible tattoo engraved on me, and I would make a point of showing this tattoo to the world. But I still didn't imagine that the next test would be so devastating that it would not only expose the betrayal, but also rip off his mask in front of everyone. That Saturday morning, I woke up determined. The sun was shining through the curtains, but for me, the day was gray. The silence in the house seemed to scream, as if every object knew the secret I carried. The sound of the coffee maker bubbling was my only consolation. I needed strength, because something in me no longer accepted living in lies. He came down the stairs smiling, dressed casually like he was just going for a run. He kissed me on the forehead, an automatic, soulless gesture. I watched closely, eyes averted, nervousness barely concealed. At that moment, I understood that every exit from him was an escape. An escape from me, from us, from the truth. I got in the car a few minutes later and drove discreetly. The streets were almost deserted and the engine noise seemed too loud. My heart was beating fast, as if trying to prevent me from seeing what was about to happen. But I didn't stop. I needed to look with my own eyes. He didn't go to the gym. The path led to a discreet, secluded street. I parked a few meters back and watched. I saw him park and wait. A few minutes later, a woman came running wearing workout clothes. She opened his car door without hesitation. It was routine. It was customary. It was blatant betrayal. My stomach turned. I wanted to honk, shout, invade that scene. But I remained motionless, stuck behind the wheel, watching in silence. It was then that they kissed. Quick, but enough to tear what little was left of me. The confirmation was before my eyes, and nothing could erase it from my mind. I returned home like someone carrying an invisible coffin. The coffin of trust, of respect, of the life we built together. He arrived hours later, pretending to be normal. I brought bread and coffee as if life were ordinary. He looked me in the eye and said, "I thought about you all the time." The lie was so loud that it echoed inside me. I spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling. With every blink, I relived their scene. The kiss, the laughter, the intimacy. My heart ached, but what burned most was the feeling of ridiculousness. While I waited at home, he was on another lap. The pain was unbearable, but it also transformed me. The next day, I started to see everything differently. His every outfit, every perfume, every message. It was as if my vision had sharpened. Now I saw clues in every detail. And the more I saw, the more certain I became that it wasn't just a betrayal. It was a well-structured double life. A message lost in the cell phone trash confirmed my suspicions. It was wonderful yesterday. I can't wait for next time. I felt the floor disappear. The letters seemed to scream, to mock me. I saved the message, took a printout, saved it like someone protecting a secret weapon. Because I knew it wasn't time to show my cards yet. He started to feel too safe. I spent more time away, arrived more relaxed, more confident. Little did he know that his every step was being recorded, his every lie was being cataloged. And that gave me strength. Because when the time came, I wouldn't just show one proof. I would show a dossier. At family gatherings, he continued to act. He kissed me in public, hugged his children, made a point of showing himself to be the ideal husband. I smiled back, like a seasoned actress. But inside me, the stage was already set. He did not realize that his own arrogance was leading him to the climax of the tragedy. I started collecting material details, invoices, application runs, screen photos, everything organized. Each item was a brick building up the wall of his doom. I no longer cried. I no longer suffered. Now, I planned. And that was more dangerous than any impulsive attack. One afternoon, when I opened the glove compartment of my car, I found an empty lipstick container. It wasn't mine. I held it between my fingers like someone holding a poisoned trophy. It was her signature left there like a territorial mark. Fury coursed through me, but silence continued to be my shield. At work, I noticed that colleagues were whispering when I passed by. The weight of ridicule was beginning to hit me. But instead of weakening me, it strengthened me. Because the shame wasn't mine, it was his. I just needed to give everyone time to figure it out. And when that happened, he would have no way to escape. One night, I decided to cook his favorite dish. I put wine on the table, lit candles. He came in smiling, thinking he still dominated the game. I watched him eat, drink, laugh. His every gesture was a confirmation that he believed his own lie. And that blind trust was my greatest ally. While he talked about projects and plans, I only saw emptiness. There was no more love, no respect, just masks. And the masks, sooner or later, fall off. I knew that dinner table, lit by candles, could very well become the scene of his downfall. In the early hours of the morning, I got up and went to the mirror. I looked at myself in the eyes. I saw a woman who was no longer a victim, but a survivor. A woman who planned to not only survive the lie, but destroy it. And I realized that the pain had given way to something new. Thirst for justice. He slept peacefully, believing that everything was under control. I, beside him, no longer saw a husband. I saw a traitor who was about to be exposed. And the cruelest thing is that he had no idea that the fall would come from where he least expected it. From me. Because something much bigger was about to happen. A revelation so brutal that it would not only confirm the betrayal, but leave him floored in front of everyone. That morning, the sound of a notification echoed in the kitchen as I was washing the dishes. It was his smartwatch, forgotten on the counter. The screen flashed with a short message. Same time today? I felt my heart stop. There was no name, just the weight of insinuation. It was like a secret password to a ritual I already knew. I took the watch in my hands, my heart racing, and looked at the history. Repeated locations, always on routes that ended at the same address. The clock didn't lie. He didn't train. He found himself. The detail that cut me the most was the time. Always 10 p.m., always when I believed he was running miles for us. At that moment, I understood that the betrayal was not accidental. It was routine, scheduled as if it were a professional appointment. I felt my legs wobble. I almost fell. But I held on tight, because I realized that I wasn't just betrayed. I was living next to someone who had two agendas. The public one, with me. The secret, with her. That day when he came home, he hugged me like always. But the difference is that now I knew the exact minutes he was with her. His smile seemed like a grotesque mask, and I could no longer look at it without contempt. The hug that once warmed me now only filled me with disgust. I started planning how I would use the clock against him. It was symbolic. The device he used to monitor his health would be the same one that revealed the illness in our marriage. Every step, every beat, every location was recorded. It was the lie materialized in data that not even he could erase. At a family dinner, he was attentive, told jokes, served wine. Everyone laughed except me. As he spoke, I remembered the map that flashed on the screen, showing the motel's address. I swallowed my anger along with the wine, and realized that my time had not yet come. But it would arrive. The next day, I went to that address. I parked the car across the street, watching. The discreet facade hid an entire universe of lies. I saw when his car arrived, and soon after, the same woman appeared. They entered together, without fear, without remorse. The lump in my throat almost choked me. I didn't cry, I just registered. I photographed discreetly, saved the images, recorded them in my memory. It was so painful, but also liberating. Because at that moment, I stopped being a hostage to doubt. I had the weapons I needed. And he would never have imagined where the blow would come from. At night, I lay down next to him, pretending to be asleep. He was playing with his cell phone, smiling sideways, believing that I was asleep. The reflection of the screen lit up his face, showing the happiness he no longer had with me. And it was there, in the silence of the room, that I made the decision. He would fall due to his own arrogance. Days later, I noticed that he got irritated when I was slow to respond to messages. He seemed insecure, as if he feared I had secrets too. I smiled to myself, because there was no greater irony than seeing him feel afraid. Anyone who builds a life of lies, sooner or later, begins to distrust even their own shadow. One rainy afternoon, I found a forgotten note in his car. "Thank you for the night. You make me feel alive." The paper smelled like sweet perfume. I held it between my fingers and felt my hands shake. It was the material proof that was missing. It was no longer digital. It was no longer a print. It was physical, palpable, irrefutable. That day, I realized that I no longer needed to ask anything. It could deny prints, messages, routes, but he couldn't deny that. It was her trail, left by carelessness, recorded on paper. And the more I looked at that note, the more my anger turned into strategy. I started to imagine the perfect scene. Show the evidence in public. Expose the truth in front of everyone. It wouldn't just be about me, but about revealing who he really was. The humiliation he tried to hide would become public. And only then would I recover what he tried to steal from me: my dignity. Over the next few nights, I slept little. I watched him lying down, breathing calmly. I asked myself, how can someone sleep peacefully carrying so many lies? The answer was simple: because he believed he would never be discovered. Little did I know that his every breath was counted, recorded, and saved by me. One Sunday during lunch, he praised me in front of his children. He said I was the most incredible woman in the world. I smiled back, but I felt bitterness run down my throat. Because the same hands that caressed me were the ones that held another woman days before. His theater no longer fooled me. I started to wonder, how many people knew besides me? Training buddies, maybe friends, maybe even family members. His betrayal was not just intimate, it was social. And this conscience gnawed at me, because I no longer suffered just for myself, but for the ridicule he made me look like in front of others. I decided I wouldn't wait much longer. The watch, the note, the photos, everything was ready. It was just a matter of choosing the moment. And the more I thought, the more I realized I didn't just want to confront. I wanted him to feel the same feeling of helplessness that made me swallow for months. Fate, however, seemed to prepare something even more cruel. Because when I thought I had seen everything, a new clue emerged, revealing that his betrayal went beyond what I imagined. It wasn't just a passing case. It was something deeper, more devastating, more humiliating. And I was about to discover that the abyss he had thrown me into was even deeper than I thought. That week, I noticed he was bolder. I spent less time at home, made up last-minute appointments, and always arrived with the same excuse: academy meeting. His gaze no longer carried guilt, but pride. It was as if he was sure he would never be caught. This blind trust gave me even more fuel. One afternoon, I decided to call him in the middle of one of these supposed training sessions. The cell phone took a while to answer. When he finally answered, the voice was too breathy for someone who said he was just lifting weights. In the background, muffled laughter. He hurried to hang up, citing a bad connection. Little did I know that the connection he broke was not that of the phone, but that of our lives. Days later, I revisited the Uber history saved on his phone. I discovered rides not just to motels, but to expensive restaurants, places he never took me. The feeling of being replaced was brutal. He didn't save money for her, while he said to me that he needed to save money. This inequality hurt more than the betrayal itself. I started to notice the new clothes that appeared out of nowhere. Expensive shirts, different perfumes, discreet accessories. When I asked, he said they were gifts from suppliers. I smiled coldly because I already knew they were treats coming from her. He not only spent time with another, but also accepted being gifted like a teenager in love. One night, while washing the dishes, I noticed him leave the room in a hurry. I took his cell phone, which was left on the table, still unlocked. I went into the gallery and found photos that had been recently deleted, but which the cloud had recovered. There he was, holding hands with her, in a park where we used to take our children. The impact was greater than if it had been in a hotel room. Because it wasn't just sex. It was intimacy. It was affection. It was the invasion of memories that belonged to our family. Seeing another woman occupying the places where I built memories was like seeing someone scratch my past with a knife. The next day, when I saw him playing with our children, I felt a mixture of hatred and compassion. Hate for deceiving not only me but also them. Compassion for realizing that sooner or later, the children would see who their father really was. And this revelation, I knew, would be even more painful than mine. I started acting as if nothing had changed. I made a point of being attentive, of preparing dinners, of maintaining a routine. He believed he was in control, but I was the one now pulling the strings. Because I knew patience would be the most lethal weapon I could use against him. A coworker casually commented, "I ran into your husband at the mall the other day. He seemed excited." My heart skipped a beat, but I pretended to be natural. I asked who I was with, and the answer was accurate. With a blonde, maybe a training partner. I smiled on the outside, but on the inside I felt anger gnawing at my bones. That night I prepared a special dinner. I put candles on the table, poured wine. He believed it was my attempt to rekindle the romance. He talked, laughed, toasted. But with every sip of wine I took, I felt like I was drinking the poison of his lie. And silently, I made a mental note. He fell again. One Sunday, while organizing my wardrobe, I found a shirt stained with lipstick. The heart quickened, but not by surprise. Confirmation no longer hurt like it used to. Now it was just another piece for the dossier. I stored the shirt in a bag as if it were a loaded gun ready to be used. Over the next few days, he began to get irritated by my silence. I asked if something was wrong, if I was distant. I would respond with a calm smile. "It's okay." The serenity confused him. He didn't know that every minute of my silence was one more brick in the construction of the scenario that would destroy him. One afternoon, I decided to follow him again. His car turned onto a busy street, parking in front of a more upscale hotel this time. I waited. Minutes later, I saw her get out of a taxi. They entered together, without looking around, as if they owned the world. That confidence sickened me, but it also made me certain that the end was near. I returned home with shaking hands. I placed the evidence on the table: photos, messages, location, the stained shirt. I looked at everything and felt a mixture of pain and pride. Pain for living this, pride for resisting and not letting myself be manipulated. His fall was no longer a question of if, but of when. In the following days, I tried to collect new evidence: the smartwatch, the ticket, the photos in the park, the shirt. Each item had a symbolic weight. It was as if I were setting up an invisible court, where he would be the defendant and I would be the judge. And in this court, there would be no chance of defense. I started to imagine the final scene: show everything in front of the family, reveal every detail, expose hypocrisy. He, who loved to play the exemplary husband in public, would see his own image crumble in front of everyone. This vision fed me. It was my fuel to continue enduring each false hug, each repeated lie. The cruelest thing was realizing that he no longer hid it so much. Maybe he believed that I was complacent, that I didn't have the courage to face him. That mistake would be the fatal blow. Because an arrogant man doesn't realize when he's about to fall. And the higher the jump, the greater the impact of the fall. One night I looked at him sleeping and realized something. There was no longer any pain. Love had died. What remained was a cold, focused, determined woman. And this woman was no longer looking for answers, but justice. And when that justice arrived, it would be final. But nothing could prepare me for the final piece of evidence I found. A discovery that would not only confirm the betrayal, but reveal that he was out to destroy me completely. I sat alone in the living room, the dim light from the television reflecting off the walls. On the table, all the evidence that I collected in silence was spread out. Prints, notes, photos, the stained shirt. It was like looking at a corpse sprawled before me, the corpse of the marriage I had carried around for years. Every detail hurt me, but it also made me stronger. Because now I had in my hands the naked, raw truth, impossible to deny. It was no longer just intuition, it was a dossier that completely dismantled his mask. I no longer just saw a traitor, I saw a bankrupt character. That night I realized it wasn't just a matter of marital betrayal. It was a question of power, dignity, and justice. How many women have been called paranoid, exaggerated, crazy? How many times has intuition been silenced to preserve a lie? I would no longer be part of that statistic. He entered the house smiling, bringing flowers. The same flowers that before would make me cry with emotion, now only caused me nausea. I placed them in the vase without looking him in the eye, because each petal was a reminder. He bought flowers not out of love, but out of guilt. And guilt has a strong smell, even disguised as perfume. As he talked about training, I watched him like someone analyzing a criminal about to be convicted. The gestures, the pauses, the rehearsed details. It was almost pathetic to see how he believed his own hoax. And that made me certain his mask wouldn't fall off on its own. I would rip it off with my hands. I started to reflect on all the times I doubted myself. The days I cried in the bathroom, believing it was exaggerated. The nights he called me paranoid, placing the blame on my shoulders. Today, I realized the problem was never me. The problem was always him and the rot he carried hidden away. At work, I heard comments that went through me like knives. "Your husband is quite lively these days." I smiled, pretending to ignore it. But inside, I kept repeating to myself, not for long. Because his joy was borrowed, supported by fragile lies. And those lies were about to fall apart. Memories of when we first met came back to mind. The sparkle in the eyes, the promises, the trips. I thought about how true it all seemed back then. But now I understand. He never changed. He just learned to hide it better. And I, who believed every word, now carried the scar of naivety. One afternoon, I sat with my children in the living room and watched their smiles. The heart sank. They didn't know. They had no idea of the silent war that was going on inside the house. I realized that the betrayal wasn't just against me. It was against our entire family. And that was the deepest wound. That night, as he slept, I stared at his face. So calm. So serene. As if he were innocent. I wanted to wake him up and scream, throw all the evidence in his face, but I held on, because I knew that the right moment would not be in the silence of the room, but in front of everyone, where there would be no escape. I picked up the forgotten note in the car and reread it for the 100th time. "You make me feel alive." I almost laughed at the irony, because while she said she felt alive, he was killing everything inside me. And with every word scribbled on that paper, I saw not just his lover, but a portrait of his cowardice. Anger became a strategy. There were no more tears, just calculation. I thought about every possible scenario, family gathered, friends present, even a formal meeting. His fall would not be discreet. It would be thunderous. Because the shame he imposed on me would be returned multiplied. I started to imagine the looks, the surprised expression of children, friends, colleagues, his mask cracking in front of everyone. It was this thought that gave me the strength to bear each false hug, each empty kiss. Because I knew, soon everyone would see what I had known for a long time. One afternoon, he left in a hurry and I forgot to hide my cell phone. I took advantage. I went into the hidden photos folder and saw intimate records with her. My body shook, but I didn't cry. I just saved each image in a secret folder. Now the arsenal was complete. He was doomed. In that instant, I realized it wasn't just about revenge, it was about giving voice back to all the silenced women. It was about showing that female intuition is not weakness, it is instinct. And whoever plays with this, sooner or later, pays dearly. He would be an example, even without knowing it. I started talking to myself more in front of the mirror. I saw a different woman. No longer the wife who begged for attention, but someone who carries scars like medals. I no longer needed his validation. What I needed was the right moment to destroy the false image he had built. At the next dinner, I served the food in silence. He told stories, laughed, made jokes. I just watched, It was like watching a mediocre actor in a bad play. I knew the ending, but I pretended to be interested, and the more he tried to appear happy, the clearer the extent of the farce became. In the evening, I sat with my notebook. Each page told a part of the story: dates, places, messages, gifts. It was an emotional crime book. And when I finished leafing through, I understood that the story would not end in silence. I was the author, and the ending would be written by me. The hardest part was controlling the look. Sometimes I wanted to strike him with the truth he carried, but I held back. Because I learned that silence, when loaded with evidence, weighs more than 1,000 words. And I would make this silence explode at the right moment. One night, when I saw him go out for another training session, I decided not to follow him. I didn't need it anymore. I already had everything I needed. His game was already mapped, recorded, exposed. What was missing was not proof, but the final blow. And this scam, I would apply myself. While he was having fun, I cleaned the house, prepared the living room, organized the documents. It was almost a theatrical scene. The stage was ready, the audience would be chosen, and the leading actor did not even suspect that his debut would also be his undoing. I stopped in front of the mirror one last time. I looked firmly into the eyes of the reflected woman. I saw pain, yes, but I also saw strength. The strength of those who survived contempt, gaslighting, manipulation. And that strength was the most powerful weapon he could ever predict. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. I imagined the scene, him denying it, writhing, trying to defend himself. But there was no defense against facts, because the truth does not ask for permission, it invades, overthrows, and exposes. And that was what was about to happen. As he slept, I thought about how many women experience what I do. How many cry in silence, how many are manipulated by men who use the same excuses. I felt a mixture of anger and solidarity, because I realized my story wasn't just mine, it was the story of many. I got up and walked around the house, feeling the weight of the moment that was approaching. Every wall, every family photo, every object seemed to stare at me, as if to say, "It's time." And I knew I really was. His watch, ironically, would be the piece that marked the end of the farce. The time approached, and I was ready. Not just to face the truth, but to throw it out in front of everyone, without mercy. Because the lie he cultivated had blossomed too much, and now the entire garden would see the poisonous herbs he planted. But I still didn't know that the moment I decided to expose everything, an even more brutal revelation would emerge. Something that would go beyond betrayal and completely change the course of my life.